Hey everybody, I'm Sam Gross with electricbikereport.com, and this is the Surface 604 Boar Explorer, an electric fat bike with all-terrain capability that's a little bit lighter than some of its competition. We're going to put this bike through the test today to see how it performs in the real world, so stick with us. The Boar Explorer, as opposed to its sibling bike, the Boar Hunter, is a little bit more of a pared down electric fat bike. Surface 604 set out to build this as a little bit more of a trail specific, off-road capable e-bike, where as the Hunter, it comes with racks, it's got a little bit more accessories, it's made to carry things. This is not. This is made to go on trails, dirt roads, and have fun in off-road environments. And I think Surface 604 has done a very nice job with that. They've built it around the 500 watt Bafeng rear hub motor. It's a very trusty rear hub motor that we've seen quite often, and that's for good reason. They're just really awesome motors. They make a lot of torque, and this one specifically, which is kind of unique to Surface 604, all of their bikes are like this. It's powered by a torque sensor. So what that means is that as opposed to something like a cadence sensor, which is basically like an on-off switch that detects whether you're pedaling or not, the torque sensor can measure how hard you're pedaling. Powering that motor is a 48 volt, 20 amp hour or whopping 960 watt hour battery. So this is an upgraded option that Surface 604 sent us with the Boar Explorer. The stock option is a 48 volt, 14 amp hour or 672 watt hour battery. Both of those options are going to give you a great range, but this upgraded option that we have on this bike goes for a really long ways, and we're going to get into that a little bit more later in the range test section. Braking is handled by a set of very trusty Tektro Auriga hydraulic disc brakes with 180 millimeter rotors front and rear. We've got a Shimano Alivio 9-speed drivetrain on this bike, which is going to be a slightly more upgraded drivetrain compared to some of the other bikes in this affordable electric fat bike category. That 9-speed drivetrain helps give you a broader range of gears. It's also going to shift crisper than some of those 7-speed options. Again, just adding a little bit of an extra upgrade layer onto its off-road capabilities. One note on that drivetrain though is that Surface 604 on their website says this bike is going to ship with a SRAM X5 drivetrain that is also 9-speed, and it's also incredibly comparable to the Shimano Alivio group set that we've got on this bike. To me, it's kind of a apples to apples comparison. They're just two different competitors, and Surface 604 has subbed out that SRAM drivetrain for the Shimano one, probably due to an ongoing parts shortage. But the good news on that is you're not getting anything worse with this bike, you're just getting a competitor. Other than that, this bike has just been a really phenomenal performer in off-road environments. It's nimble, it's light, it only weighs at 50 pounds. That is really light for an electric fat bike. Most of the bikes that we're testing in this category weigh 70 pound plus. We just tested a bike recently that's in the 80 pound range. It's in the same category. So 50 makes this bike feel very nimble, very light, and very quick. But we'll dive more into how it performs a little bit later in this video. Surface 604 specs the Boar Explorer with a set of Tektro Auriga hydraulic disc brakes with 180 millimeter rotors front and rear. These are brakes from a name brand that we know very well, and I have high expectations of how they're going to perform in our brake test, where we bring the bike up to 20 miles an hour 5 times and slam on the brakes as hard as we possibly can. We take the average distance of all of those stops, and that is the result of our braking test. So let's see how the Explorer performs. The Surface 604 Boar Explorer performed well on our brake test, coming to a stop at an average distance of 16 feet and 3 inches. That's just a couple of inches further than our average stopping distance of all the bikes we've tested so far, which is 16 feet 1 inches. So overall, a great result from these Tektro Auriga hydraulic disc brakes, and you should feel confident they're going to get the job done when you need to come to a stop quickly. So to get an idea of how this upgraded 48 volt 20 amp hour battery performs, we put it through two separate range tests. The first in PAS5, which is the bike's highest pedal assist level, and the second in PAS2, which is the second lowest pedal assist level. Now in PAS5, this bike went for 35.18 miles before it finally died. And in PAS2, it went for 50.18 miles before it finally died. Both of those are really great results that I think justifies this upgraded larger battery. One thing to keep in mind about these fat bikes, even though this is a fairly light version, is that those big tires take a lot of energy to turn over. You're going to need a bigger battery to help compensate for that kind of additional drag that you're seeing out of those tires. That 48 volt 14 amp hour stock battery option is probably going to do a great job, but 35 miles out of this bike with the 20 amp hour option, that I think is worth the additional $300 that Surface604 charges for that battery upgrade. That also, I'd like to note, is very cheap for a battery upgrade option. Usually when you're getting a 20 amp hour battery or a battery of that significant size, you're paying 2 or 3 times more than that. So it's an upgrade that I would highly recommend. So the Boar Explorer's cockpit is fairly standard issue among e-bikes. It's got a very nice full color LCD display. It's the one from Bafeng. We've seen it quite often and it's one we really like. It's very easy to use, it's easy to read, it's nice to interact with as the rider. You also have a thumb throttle on the left-hand side, which again is another preference on my part as opposed to the twist style throttles, which we see on some other electric fat bikes. I like the thumb throttle more than the twist throttle because you don't have the risk of accidentally bumping it in more technical terrain. You can kind of keep the throttle off of the grip area so you can hang on and bump around without fear of tapping it. Handling wise, the Boar is a really wonderful handling off-road e-bike. I like that it's not very heavy. I like that the geometry is more mountain bike-like versus kind of path cruiser-like. It's very, very nice on terrain like this where we are today. It handles tight stuff well and you can get up and over stuff relatively easily. But there is kind of an elephant in the room about the Surface604 Boar that a lot of people are going to pick up on. I'm actually anticipating quite a few comments about it in this video, and it's that rigid fork. The Boar doesn't come stock with any sort of suspension. Instead, it relies entirely on those 4.5-inch Maxxis Colossus tires, which, if you do pay attention to your air pressure, do a really nice job of actually taking the edge off some of the bumps. Now, I spoke with Surface604 and asked why they chose to spec this bike with a rigid fork, and their reasoning is fairly simple, and I happen to actually very much agree with it. Their argument is that to keep this bike affordable, they would have had to put a cheap suspension fork on it, which quite frankly introduces a lot of flex into the front end. You begin to have questions about how long that fork is going to be able to withstand off-road riding. And it really just wasn't going to be the quality of ride or the quality of performance that Surface604 wanted out of this bike. So they chose to put the rigid fork on there. To me, it makes the bike more stiff, it makes it feel a little bit more precise, and you do feel the trail a little bit more than if it had suspension, but I like having the confidence of knowing that that fork is not going to break down, I'm not going to have issues with the seals, it's going to perform as advertised for probably the duration of how long you have this bike. Now, you can upgrade that fork. Surface604 gives you an option to have a Wren inverted suspension fork installed on this. It's an additional upgrade you can add in checkout. The Wren forks are spectacular. They're inverted, they look a lot like a dirt bike fork. They're really built specifically for fat bikes, and the additional rotational mass you get out of that front tire, it's remarkably stiff, they ride really well, and they work very well. So if suspension is something you want, and you're willing to pay for it, you can get a really awesome fork on this bike and really even bring the ride quality up just that little bit much more. But I've been happy with the stock fork. It rides really, really nice. So as we've mentioned before, this Bafeng 500-watt rear hub motor is one we've known very well and have really come to adore quite a lot. It's torquey, it's fast, it feels very responsive. It does really nicely in these off-road kind of tighter environments that this bike has been designed for. But one thing I'd like to say about it is that it feels so much different on Surface604 bikes because of that dropout mounted torque sensor. So as we've mentioned before, the cadence sensor really works as an on and off switch, and cadence sensors are something that you see quite often on these sub $3,000 electric fat bikes. And what they do is they basically are just able to tell the motor whether you're pedaling or not, and then it gives you all the power all at once. It's very hard to modulate the power and control it. In a torque sensor, it measures how hard you're actually pushing down on the pedals and gives you a very measured amount of energy and relative to your pedaling. What that does, especially in an off-road environment, is it just gives you so much more control over what is a very powerful motor. It helps in tight situations, it helps with cornering, it helps leverage the motor's power to get your front wheel up and over things. It's a really, really nice feature to have. It also helps squeeze just what feels like more energy out of this relatively small motor for an electric fat bike. We do see a lot of electric fat bikes coming with 750 watt rear hub motors. Surface 604 opts for the 500 watt option, and I think it's plenty powerful, especially when you pair it with a torque sensor. It also has the added benefit of it helps keep the weight down. You got a smaller motor, motors are heavy. A 500 watt is going to be less heavy than a 750 watt option, and I think we see that reflected in this bike's 50-pound weight. To get an idea of how this bike's motor performs a little bit more precisely, we put it through several laps around our circuit test. Now, the Boar comes as a Class 2 e-bike with the throttle and the pedal assist settings both limited to 20 miles an hour. We did all of our testing in that because we did do quite a lot of testing on this bike on bike paths, but it is capable of being upgraded to a Class 3 or 28 mile an hour pedal assist setting. And what we found was in all 5 of this bike's pedal assist levels around our circuit, we saw a really nice distribution of power, about a 1 to 2 mile per hour average difference between pedal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with that 5th pedal assist level being a 19.8 mile an hour lap around our circuit. So really awesome result from the Boar. To get an idea of how well the 500 watt motor that comes on the Boar Explorer climbs hills, we brought it out to our test hill hellhole. We're going to put it through 2 different hill tests. The first on PAS 5 with the help of my legs, and the second with just the throttle to get an idea of just how far this motor can go and how well it goes up hills. So let's see how it does. So this is the Surface 604 Boar Explorer PAS 5 hill climb test. And it's starting to cycle through the gears in this relatively steep section. But that 500 watt rear hub motor just not showing a lot of sign of slowing down. I think it's just absolutely cruising. Torque sensor is picking up, but I want all the power out of that rear hub motor. This is the throttle-only hill test of the Boar Explorer. I'm going to put this 500 watt motor to a pretty significant test. And she's cruising. A little bit of vibration there coming up to the seat. It's not too terribly abnormal on a hill like this for a rear hub bike. Definitely feeling the steep section of the hill, but really not giving an indication that we're not going to clear it. It's just definitely feeling the steepness. Gaining speed again on this more mellow section of hill, which is actually just pretty impressive that it gains speed at all right there, because that's still fairly steep. And then here's the final pitch. This is the part that always gets bikes if they are going to fail, is right here, because there's no momentum going into it. And we're home free. Getting a little bit of vibration from the bike. Nearly done. So the Boar Explorer performed very well up hellhole. In the throttle only test, it cleared the hill in 1 minute and 31 seconds with an average speed of 11.9 miles per hour. Then in PAS 5, it cleared the hill in 1 minute and 13 seconds with an average speed of 14.9 miles per hour. So really great results out of this 500 watt rear hub motor. They're honestly outperforming some of the other 500 watt rear hub motors that we're seeing on this test hill. Occasionally, we're seeing 500 watt rear hub motor equipped bikes do their throttle only tests in 2 minutes or more up the hellhole. So a 1 minute 31 result, that's really great. And I have to chalk up some of this high performance to the bike's weight. 50 pounds is just very, very light for an electric fat bike. And I'm really happy with how the Explorer performed up our test hill. All in all, I've had a really fun time reviewing the Surface 604 Boar Explorer electric fat bike. And the reason being is because I really, really, really appreciate e-bikes where the manufacturer has set a goal out, just like Surface 604 did, and they really don't stray from it. Surface 604 set out to build the Boar Explorer as a capable, nimble, lightweight, and no-nonsense off-road and adventure electric fat bike, and I think they've done a really spectacular job with it. They haven't wasted any weight or space on the bike by installing things like racks or fenders or a folding mechanism or really anything else that just distracts from the fact that this bike is supposed to perform well on trails and dirt roads and things like that. It's been a lot of fun to ride. I also give Surface 604 credit for what I would call the bold move of not putting a suspension fork on this bike. I really, really do stand by the statement that some of these cheaper suspension forks don't do much but detract from the bike's overall ride quality, especially in terrain like this, the terrain that this bike was designed to handle best. They instead chose to do what I think might be a controversial move in the eyes of some consumers of putting a rigid fork on an off-road bike. It helps keep this bike feeling stable and planted and just almost like scalpel precise in corners and technical terrain. You do feel the trail more, but I really think that people that are going to appreciate the Boar are going to appreciate a little bit more of a lively bike that they can feel the trail through their handlebars. I've personally really, really enjoyed the Surface 604 Boar. It's been a great bike, and if you've enjoyed our review of the Surface 604 Boar Explorer, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates from Surface 604 and the other brands that we cover. And if you want more details about the Explorer, be sure to click the link in the description below this video for a more in-depth written review where we captured all of the data that we recorded on the Boar. For Electric Bike Report, I'm Sam Gross. Thank you so much for watching.